So hello and welcome back to the MCC Brussels podcast. I'm Jacob Reynolds, Head of Policy for MCC Brussels. Sorry, we've been away for a little while. We haven't had a podcast out for a few weeks, but if you've been following the news, you'll know that that's because we've been very busy dealing with some of the crises in the city that we're going to discuss a little bit more later. But also, we've been busy getting ready a new look and a new approach to the podcast. We've got some nice new gear to be testing out today. So I hope that you hear and can see the difference. Today, we're going to be taking a look at three topics. First, we're going to be looking at the crisis of free speech in Brussels and beyond, and what we're doing with the Brussels Free Speech Declaration to challenge that. We're going to take a look at the ongoing rule of law saga and drama in Poland, which maybe now has been brought to a close, and we're going to use that to try and explore what it means for what the EU is actually all about. And lastly, we're going to dig into some of the kind of fallout and scandal surrounding Eurovision. So, Tony, we've been very busy, as I alluded to, with regards to working on the fallout from the attempted cancellation of the NatCon conference. And in the wake of that, we've launched the Brussels Free Speech Declaration. Why have we launched the Free Speech Declaration? What kind of drove us to this point?
Well, actually, Jacob, it was a month ago, exactly a month ago, that we were on at NatCon as a lead supporting partner, and the police were sent in by the mayor, Agnieszka, the mayor of Saint-Just-Tenude. And the police were sent in with an order to shut us down. We held them off, we stood our ground, and eventually had the ruling overturned in the Supreme Court. That was a really important moment because what it taught us, and I think it showed to others, is the importance of fighting for free speech. So often in these situations, and there's been many of them in Belgium, but also in the UK and other countries, there's this attempt to cancel events that people dislike, or some people dislike. You get the activists coming in threatening terror and violence. Then you get the officialdom saying we can't possibly allow this to go ahead, and they always use the pretext of safety. It can't go ahead safely. And we didn't back down. And that taught people something. And the venue owner at Claridge, he didn't back down. He supported free speech. And so there's a big lesson there. And it's really important that we communicate that and we celebrate that and get more and more people to join a network that says, no, free speech is fundamental to democracy. How can we possibly hold politicians to account? How can we possibly work out what we think about all the complex and important issues facing us if we can't talk freely about it? So it's so important to build that network, so important to learn the lessons of the need to fight for free speech over and over again.
And we've obviously, for the moment, we're focusing kind of in Brussels as the centre of the European Union and where these debates really ought to take place. Can you tell us about, I mean, we hope to broaden this out, obviously, but why is it so important that we win the argument for free speech here in Brussels?
Well, first of all, you've got the reality is Brussels is a key location for a political discussion about the nature of the European Union and European Union policies. It's the so-called capital of Europe. It's actually been really striking, Jacob, the number of people who've come forward to translate the declaration into other languages for other member states. So we've had Czech people come forward, we've had Spanish, we've had German, and we've got Romanian offering as well. So basically people are recognising around Europe that free speech is required in Brussels if we're going to debate the nature of Europe.
Yeah, Benny, one of the things that strikes me on a lot of these kind of free speech controversies as they come up is that they often seem to be led, or kind of the demands for cancellations of events sometimes seem to come from kind of younger people. It happens a lot at universities, as we know, but more broadly, like the protests that took place, the small protests that took place outside NatCon or just up the road from NatCon, there were quite a few young people there. Why do you think young people often seem to be kind of leading the charge for these kind of anti-speech initiatives?
First, I think that they have nothing to lose. Obviously, they are full of potential and dreams and wishes, and they definitely try to follow the contemporary political trends. And here, at least in Brussels, and based on my experiences so far, what I see is that there is this drive that people of my age, in the early career starting age, are afraid of the rise of the right, and they are led to a story where the evil right-wingers are going to take over Europe, and if that happens, their whole world shatters, their whole world collapses. So they must do everything to stop this process. Also here in Brussels is an interesting phenomenon because my generation, the early career starter generation, can be split into two parts. The generation that is interested in politics but is currently still studying, and the other one who are already interested in politics and are working in politics because they have their jobs. The second group is obviously going to be interested in cancelling voices that are against them. The other group of students, basically, they just want to follow the contemporary spirit. It is our job with MCC Brussels, basically, to just soothe the mood and just make sure that everyone feels heard, because that is the contemporary trend. Everybody wants to be heard and seen, and we can play a crucial role in that.
But it's not just a kind of uniform picture of all young people want to close down speech, is it? I know through some of the work that you've been doing for us recently that actually there are a lot of young people that really feel this pressure too. We saw a lot of them at NatCon who'd heard about what was happening and so wanted to come. But more broadly in our work, we see that young people too are kind of chafing under these restrictions on speech about what you can and can't say. Is this something you've been experiencing as we've been reaching out?
Of course. Even when we were outside NatCon, when basically the artificial curfew was applied, basically I could talk to some university students that were very much not on board with the principles of MCC Brussels, but they were cautious enough to just stand there, talk to us, ask about our work. And even when we were in Flanders in the past, we just managed to talk to students that were genuinely curious about our work. So it's good to see that there is this third way of people that are willing to open up to new ideas and just are willing to have a genuine conversation.
Yeah. One of those things, Tony, that Benny touched on is, I think, going to be a key part of the work for the declaration going forward, which is that we also need to challenge this narrative that kind of everybody who speaks out against all of the orthodoxies that dominate the EU are somehow kind of far right, ultra right, extreme right, ultimately fascist. How do we kind of settle the language around that, which it really kind of adds to this climate of hostility towards free speech?
Well, I think there's two points. One in response to what Benny was saying, actually, just first, is that young people have been treated like they're fragile. They've been treated like they need to be protected from speech. They have trigger warnings throughout their education at university. So they're treated like they cannot cope with ideas. And what's really interesting is that there are these curious young people, like that Benny's talking about, that are confused by what's going on, and they're not accepting the current line that's being given to them by the authorities, and they want to explore other ideas. So that's really encouraging, and that's why, in answer to your question, we've got to make the point that the EU and elite authorities are trying to control the narrative. They're scared of many debates that ordinary people want to have. They're scared of the issues that young people are interested in and not convinced about what the authorities are saying. And they don't want those debates to take place unless in a very guarded, protected form that they get to control. So it's really about the authorities in the EU, for example, and many governments trying to control the narrative. And that's what we've got to draw out and make clear, that free speech isn't a right-wing issue. Free speech is an issue for absolutely everybody of any political persuasion. And that's why it's so important that through this declaration, we are standing up for the free speech of anyone, including all the people that we fundamentally disagree with.
Yeah, Benny, I mean, that point about free speech not being a right-wing issue seems to me very true. I mean, only a few weeks ago, and there have been, I think, more examples since, but there was this Palestine conference or pro-Palestine conference that was shut down by the German police, at which Yanis Varoufakis was due to speak. Free speech is not a left-right issue, is it? It's also something that's happened to people who consider themselves on the left.
Very much so, I would say. Even in my discussions with university students in the past, not just the Israel-Palestine issue, but you can see this underlying confusion and fear in people, that whenever it comes to political conversations, what you encounter with is that if you have hard enough of an idea, maybe that's not the right way of saying it, but you probably get the point, even if you're a left or right and very passionate about what you have to say, if it triggers enough people, and it's a crucial word, if it triggers enough people, you are likely to be facing serious criticism and serious attacks. And I had friends who are, I would say, are very much like flat out communists, but there's nothing wrong with that until, and that is also a crucial point, because Frank Freddy quite often reiterates this thought that I agree for free speech or there is a certain point where your opinion is very important, I appreciate it, but you should put it in a wardrobe and put it away because it may offend other people. And this is a sentiment, and this is the climate that we are currently in, at least in my generation. And that is something that we really have to fight against and make sure that we open up to new ideas.
Yeah. So, Tony, what are kind of the next steps for our work around the declaration, and how can people who want to support free speech, how can they get involved?
Okay, well, so we've now had many hundreds of people sign the declaration so far. As I've mentioned, people are coming forward to translate it into other languages. What we need to do now is build on that, so that we want everybody who's involved so far to encourage tens or hundreds of other people to join in and sign the declaration. But it's not just about signing the declaration. It's not a tick box. It's about having the conversation about the significance of free speech, the significant clampdown that has been going on for many years, and to persuade people of the importance of it. Because for a lot of people, they will say, yeah, free speech, that sounds important, but yeah, what about all these concerns about people being offended, people being upset, things getting polarized? So a lot of people are not quite sure where they stand on the issue of free speech. So for those of us who do, and as I say, hundreds of people to sign the declaration, we have an obligation. We have an obligation to go out there, talk to friends, talk to colleagues, persuade them of the importance of the issue and get them on board too. And that will be whether you're a notable individual, whether you're a major organisation, or whether you're just like an average guy or woman or anybody. We want to get people talking about this and get the ball rolling.
Yeah, well, so people should head to the website, sign the declaration, share it on social media, or share one of our posts on social media supporting it, and get in touch. As Tony says, if you've got a big public profile or you run an organisation that like to support it, we'd love to hear from you. So one of the standout stories of the last few weeks has been the announcement from the European Commission that they've kind of formally dropped the rule of law process that was taking place against Poland, that was obviously very much targeted at the previous government. Agnieszka, what's gone on? Why have they dropped the case? Is it kind of what it seems on the face of it, or explain it to us?
Well, I think it's blatantly obvious that it's been engineered towards the previous government, conservative government. It was a thorn in European Commission's side for a long time. Obviously, the first shock to the system, European system of how things should be done, according to those in power, was in 2015 when they got into power, and obviously straight away they were against the huge migration coming into Europe and actually not being challenged. And then other things came on top of that. And I think with this story from the last few weeks, it's a proof where before you would say maybe it's like a conspiracy theory, or people don't take seriously the rule of law, the European values, all of the things that were being said by European Commission. But now it's obvious that since Tusk got in power, it's a coalition government, but somehow everyone can see now that he's playing the main role in this government. And we also see it in the polling of the Third Way party, that they're losing the support because everyone sees that actually Tusk party is more in charge than anyone else in this coalition. They haven't really done major changes apart of restricting the media, because that was the first decision put into place, that they shut down the state TV, obviously claiming that it's going to make the media more pluralistic and open and even-handed. And you could say, yeah, great, but actually that created a situation that the only independent media are now on YouTube, and it's TV Republika. And there were already attempts to take them down, targeting the advertisers on the website. And the other things that happened was the Minister of Culture and National Heritage calling off the choice of a painter to represent Poland at the Venice Biennale, which was also interesting because his paintings were addressing the difficult history of Poland, but also through that addressing the issues between Russia and Germany and the conflict with Ukraine. So when you look at that, it's actually just cosmetic changes. There were around 9 proposals to change the law in relation to courts, but nothing has been done on a major scale. So releasing the funds, stopping this procedure, the Article 7, that shows that it was all a play.
Yeah, so I think it's become very clear as a result of what's gone on in Poland that rule of law is not about kind of making sure that rules are followed, but is actually a political weapon that the European Commission leverages against countries that kind of don't toe the EU line. And then as soon as Poland elected a president came to power in Poland who was more friendly to the EU, magically kind of all of these rule of law issues disappear. Bence, obviously Hungary's been front and center of many of these so-called rule of law disputes. I mean, how do you respond to this, these kind of developments, or what does it make you think with regards to the progress of rule of law in Hungary?
Well, I guess it's quite unlikely at the moment that we will sign up to the European agenda, given the fact that now, as the election campaign is in its heat and everyone is getting more and more excited about the elections coming up, basically the current sentiment in Hungary is that the Fidesz party communication pretty much focuses on 3 key issues, which is gender, migration, and war, 3 very important subjects for the European discussion, and Hungary is representing quite a staunch stance on this situation. And at the moment when we're currently talking, basically the Erasmus Plus program is still in danger in Hungary. So as we are speaking, Hungarian students basically are withheld from these funds, and for a Hungarian student to just go abroad is now pretty much, it's nearly impossible. Obviously, we managed to circumvent the system in some shape or form. That's Hungarian ingenuity for you there. But obviously, that's not the right way to approach this whole issue. So what we have on our hands now is we have a campaign period rising up, but it's unlikely that we see any progress on this issue until July, August, September. And even as we're speaking, even at the ECJ, currently the EU and the Hungarian relations don't seem to improve in any shape or form.
Yeah, so Agnieszka, I think it's really remarkable the degree to which, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I mean, Tusk hasn't really made any changes to Poland, right? They say, oh, now the courts are back in safe hands and everything's kind of independent, but it seems that he's only been in power for a few months. And has anything actually changed in Poland for even the kind of semblance of kind of transformation of the rule of law?
When it comes to rule of law, no. But you could see dramatic changes. But then, depending where you see it politically, you would see it from a different perspective. So obviously, the fervent supporters of Tusk, they're getting almost like a fest of hate and revenge and blood, of sacking different directors, representatives. So it's a revenge fest. So they're getting what they wanted. And in a sense, it's constantly being heated up. People that are more kind of trying to find the middle ground between the two warring parties, they are very disappointed that all of the promises focus on industry, small business, high taxes, issues with high level of payment for the health insurance for small businesses. Nothing is being done about that. There's lots of clips going around ridiculing Tusk for promising to keep the petrol price low, and actually it's higher and higher week by week. In that front, I think the middle ground is really, really angry, and they're slowly becoming disillusioned with the reality of what's going on. There is a huge discussion about CPK transit center, new airport that is being delayed, and it's not very clear whether this government would commit to building it. So it's still being pushed around. When it comes to the side supporting Law and Justice Party, the conservative bloc in Poland, they obviously, from the beginning, they see it as a bad sign with all the stages of the shock tactic of closing the media, then trying to stifle an independent media that are run on a subscription basis or advertisement on a YouTube. Also, the major institutions losing their heads. And even on the culture sphere, as I mentioned, the Venice Biennale, it was already showing that you could have decided to just let it be, and if anything, just use artists that would anyway support the pro-EU government and would criticize the artists' exhibition. Now they decided to take it down and make it really in a kind of bold movement, almost stamping their feet. So I think it shows that it's nothing about the rule of law. It's about pleasing the EU Commission and especially Germany. So the case about retributions, like the payment back to Poland for all that we lost during the Second World War, was dropped. That already changed the tone from the German government and all the officials. So almost it's just like a celebration that this new government is just keeps on giving and giving, especially to Germany and France.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Germany, Agnieszka, because one of the stories we broke a few weeks ago was a German group of NGOs that were running a workshop that was looking at what was going on in Poland in terms of, as you say, kind of replacing almost the entire media sector, completely restacking all of the cultural centers and these kind of basically putting all of their own people in power, like a kind of hostile takeover or like a kind of mini revolution in a way. And they were looking at that and they were saying, this is the anti-populist playbook, right? This is what we do when we win power back from those nasty populists. Benny, do you think this is something that the kind of opposition in Hungary would be looking at? Would we expect something similar if they got to power in Hungary?
Definitely. I mean, even in the current political landscape, NGOs play a crucial role. They are the players that can utilize the youth vote. The university students are signing up for the NGO support, and they are the ones that try to thematize the political discussion. It's NGOs that in some shape or form try to rally people to the streets. It's sometimes NGOs trying to create reports that depict a bad picture about the government, be it a right justification, a right criticism, or wrong criticism. What you can see here in Hungary is that basically NGOs try to be these front runners of this discussion. And one big problem is that even a couple of weeks ago, the EESC, European Union body, had an interesting conversation with Green politicians, German Green politicians, and they mentioned that in countries which obviously experience democratic deficits or backsliding, those are potential countries where NGO activities no longer should be that transparent, because the main argument is if the authoritarian regimes of the East or the non-EU abiding regimes are cracking down on free speech, why should NGOs play fair? And we are in a very interesting situation where NGOs act almost like a fourth branch of power, where they represent a different form of political representation. And if they are more involved in all the politics, we may never know what kind of influence they may have on our everyday lives.
Yeah. Right, well, we wouldn't be a Brussels-based outfit if we weren't going to talk about Eurovision. And this year, I mean, every year it seems to be getting more and more politicized, but this year it's been particularly a kind of hotbed, not just of musical controversy, but also political controversy. The main shape that the controversy took, as everyone's familiar, was especially around Israel and the Israeli Act. One of the things that I'm really interested in your take on, Maren, is the degree to which the split, what seemed to be the big split between the popular vote and the judges, the kind of judges or the panel, kind of as it were, which we might call the elite vote. In particular, I mean, Ireland, that kind of crazy, satanic Irish Act, that received kind of quite good votes from the panels, but didn't do so well in the popular vote. Israel was kind of the situation reverse, where it got a big big boost in the popular vote, but the kind of panels weren't so keen on it. And in fact, all of the artists were staging, it seemed almost like a kind of boycott of the of the Israeli Act as well. So, Maren, what have you made about these kind of political controversies around Eurovision?
Well, political controversies belong to Eurovision. It was ever thus. It is part of the genre of Eurovision. But I think it has become quite extreme this year. And as you said, there has been a kind of outside imposition of politics onto Eurovision politics that would have been gone anyway. So what I think what has happened is that there has been a big insurge of politics from the outside. So the Israeli protestants are using every opportunity to oust Israeli cultural imports. So, they've just cancelled the Israeli string quartet in Amsterdam and so on. And because of the high profile of the Eurovision, they have really pounced on this one. And there has been this kind of, because I don't think there's a good support for Israel all in Europe, like publicly, venues are giving in and giving support to the protesting pro-Palestinian protests. But then we have the public vote that suddenly belied all these, quite vocal elitist kids for supporting Palestine. So, even the kind of public vote has, shows that there has been a political Eurovision all along, but it has been, misunderstood by the media, how they represented the political disputes, and the public, how they, then responded towards it.
Yeah, I think it's really important there to note that maybe open expressions of solidarity with Israel kind of haven't been so notable across Europe. There've been kind of no kind of major marches in after kind of Hamas launched the horrific raid on Israel. But under the surface, like when people are given an opportunity to express solidarity with Israel, like the popular vote, I think suggested that that there's kind of more of it about than we might seem. Benny, you were maybe, we might say, kind of more hate-watching Eurovision. As we said, what did you make of the controversies? Which acts kind of really stood out for you? But why are you emotionally scarred by the experience of being forced to watch Eurovision?
Honestly, I have to make a confession. I lived in a delusion because up until 2014, when Conchita Wurst was the Eurovision winner, up until that point, I thought that Eurovision is the event where we truly celebrate European diversity, national diversity, where the representatives of the respective countries come up with an act that truly signifies the German spirit, the Ukrainian spirit, the Serbian spirit. And it does that, but it does it in a beautiful way. It's truly a manifestation of contemporary European values, because there is nothing more European than a bunch of non-binary, gender fluid individuals that whip around their stuff. Some people actually did that. And they just run around the roads, the streets, and they come up with weird political slogans, and they just say, yes, we are European. And there was this Dutch performer who got disqualified. Basically, if you look at his performance in the semifinal, that guy was incredibly terrifying. The way he was smiling at you is the exact way we can imagine the EU elites basically looking at you, smiling in your face, telling you how you should think as a European. If you don't do that, you better go away, because this is not a place where you belong. And with all the controversies, basically, I mean, I really enjoyed the Instagram conversations I had, because I recorded the Irish singer when she was asked at a press conference about how she feels about the presence of the Israeli performer. She made quite, I think she was honest when she was truly triggered by the presence of the Israeli performer. But that is what I realized. This whole Eurovision is I may have wanted to say something quite vulgar, but I would rather stick with, they want to become a festive and an event of controversies, of hyperboles, and very unique interpretations of contemporary European culture. And if you are triggered, then you are the audience. So that is the main idea of Eurovision. Gaining attention, gaining hype, and I think this is the package that they are selling, and they are getting quite good at it.
Maren, I mean, Eurovision in a way has always been a kind of festival or a celebration of the weird. Some of it's had this kind of national element, as Benny was talking about, but it seems that that's now just exclusively leveraged in service of scoring kind of cheap political or cultural points. Or is there something still redeemable in Eurovision?
Eurovision is always following its own rules. So there is a genre of Eurovision that has been established over 50 years. And these rules actually hold very strong and steady. So what does it take to have a winning Eurovision song? I think there's, it can be all kind of musical genres, but it has to be memorable. It has to go to the heart. You have to be serious. So one special thing about the Eurovision is that it's extremely, extremely camp, right? But you have to take it also extremely, extremely seriously. And this is where often, acts fail because they think it's just a joke. England often got nil point in the past because they didn't take it seriously enough, and that's not how you do a Eurovision. You take it seriously and you mean it. And you have to appeal to the audience. You have to be memorable, and that very, very quickly. It's a 3-minute act. So your music has to have a hook that you can sing along to after the first chorus. You can hum along. It has to be really, really instant. People have to recognize who and what you are very quickly. They have to read you. This is why I think Bambi Thug, the Irish entry, was a brilliant Eurovision entry. She was a woke witch, but she was a really good woke witch. She did have a really good song. It was a really skilled performance. It was dramatic, and it was instantly recognizable. People knew what was going on very, very quickly. And it was a very, very good performance. And she meant it. That's one of the main things about Eurovision songs. You have to mean it. So you have to be a woke witch and mean it. And you talked about her persona outside the actual competition. She is that person, like Dolly Parton said, find out who you are and, be that in excess.
Yeah, well, we might agree to disagree on Bambi Thug, but one of the things, Benny, was kind of really illuminating was the way in which Eurovision, I think, became another one of these examples, and we saw it a little bit with the kind of campus protests, the pro-Palestine campus protests in the States, where the kind of conflict between Israel and Palestine is obviously literally far away, but it also felt, I think, for a lot of people, figuratively far away. There are obviously lots of people who identify very strongly with Palestine, but people who kind of didn't have much of an opinion made up about it, or maybe kind of instinctively identified a bit more with Israel. It kind of felt like something that was happening abroad that wasn't really of interest to us. And then something has happened, I think, in both the campus protests in America, where suddenly people saw on their streets this kind of open expression of anti-Americanism, this instinctive identification with Islam, a kind of instinctive identification with everything that isn't part of the West. And similarly, I think Eurovision, we might categorize as another one of those moments where people in Europe suddenly saw this kind of very much elite-driven view that we have to all sympathize with Palestine, that the Israelis are kind of barbaric, genocidal murderers, all the worst kind of anti-Semitic stereotypes. And I think what was kind of revealed to people in that moment in Eurovision was they were seeing this brought home. And so that big popular vote in many countries, in Ireland, in France, in Germany, in the UK for Israel, I think represents a little bit, Benny does it, the way in which has been really brought home to people that what is going on in Israel actually is kind of like there is something of a civilizational battle being fought that even if we're not going to be directly fighting it, it's kind of part of this culture war that we're a part of still.
Absolutely agree with this. And I mean, just an irony that I want to point out that the stadium in Malmö is approximately 3 kilometers away from Rosengård in Malmö, which is the infamous no-go zone. So you have a venue and a place where they celebrate all sorts of spectrum of the current cultural trends. And then you have 3 kilometers away, one of the biggest immigrant pockets in Sweden. And that alone signifies you how out of touch Eurovision is. But in this indirect way, Eurovision contributes to a sort of illuminating experience because people truly see that if this is the best Europe has to offer, we have to change. And if I think I watched Eurovision with my parents when I was 14, and I remember my dad looking at this Conchita Wurst performance, and obviously he has a unique perspective on this whole issue. But the conversation we had at that night truly showed me that if there's one thing Eurovision is good for, is teaching us a lesson about how we should think about our European identity. And the direction that we are currently going in, or that we have chosen, or the European elites have chosen, is not necessarily the one that the European public would choose. And I think it's a good reminder that if we don't look at the symptoms and the problems that Eurovision basically manifests, we are going in a very wrong direction, and we have to think actively about the future of our continent.